Okay, guys, in this video, I need to talk to you about a variable. A variable is a storage area in RAM that holds data. It's like a suitcase that holds data. Now, when you create a variable, when you create this storage area, you use a data type followed by the variable name and then a semicolon. So if you want to hold like something that has one character, like someone's middle initial, you would use a char data type. And you would create it by saying char space letter semicolon. So maybe someplace in RAM there's one place here, and the name of that is letter. And it can hold every character on your keyboard. Now, when I say char, some computers implement a char as 1 byte big, and others implement it as 2 bytes big, and we'll see why later on. But for right now, let's just assume a char is 1 byte big, and this is how you create it. And that's going to be a spot someplace in RAM called letter, maybe up here, and it can hold every character representation on your keyboard. Okay, now if you want to have many characters, like you want to ask somebody for their first name, you have to create a variable called, say, fname of type string. And that can be as small or as big as you need it to be. So if you're going to hold Abe, A-B-E, it's going to be so big. And if you're going to hold Nicolarat, it's going to be much bigger. Okay, so many characters, you would use a data type called a string. One character, you would use a data type called a char. Okay, if you're going to enter a whole number, you have a choice. You can create a variable of type byte, it's 1 byte big, or shart, it's 2 bytes big, or int, and it's 4 bytes big. Now, what's the difference between a byte, shart, and an int? Well, the range of a byte is negative 128 to plus 127. I mean, there's only 256 ways you can configure 8 wires that make up a byte. Okay, and what would it look like to create a variable of type byte? Okay, it would be right here. You would say byte space num1 semicolon. That would create an area in RAM called num1. It's 1 byte big, and it can hold a number from negative 128 to plus 127. What about a shart? A shart is 2 bytes big. It has a range of negative 32,768 to plus 32,767. I mean, you can only configure 16 wires 65,536 ways. So if you cut that in half and you put a 0 in the middle, that's the range. Okay, this is how you would create a variable of type shart called num2. So someplace in RAM, maybe over here, here's num2. It's 2 bytes big. Now, an int is 4 bytes big. And you can create something that can hold a value between negative 2 billion and plus 2 billion, because something that's 4 bytes big has about 4 billion different ways to be configured. And if you cut that in half, approximately negative 2 billion to plus 2 billion. How would it look if you created a variable called num3 of type int? How about that? And it's going to be 4 bytes big. 4 bytes big. Now, if you needed to hold a decimal point, you could have two choices. You have a float that's 4 bytes big, okay? Or you could have a double that is 8 bytes big, okay? Now, I just want you to know right now, those are general data types. For your knowledge here, if you understood a char, right, and you should, remember it uses ASCII, and 65, 64 and 1 is capital A, and 66, 64 and 2 is capital B, and remember capital C would be 67, and lowercase a is 97, lowercase b is 98, lowercase c 99, and the character 0 is 48, the character 1, the numeric character 0 is 48, the numeric character 1 is 49, and so forth. Okay, so if you knew a char, that would be great, and if you know a byte, that would be good, I think. Okay, now hold on here. Why is a byte limited to 256 ways, therefore saying it can only store negative 128 through 0 to 127? By the way, that is 256 different ways. But why is a byte only have 256 different ways. Alrighty, let me show you. If you had one wire, one bit, you could configure this as off and on. Okay, off and on, right? So there's two ways to configure it. If you had two wires, two bits, it could be off, off, on, off, or off, on. Four ways to configure it. If you had three wires, okay, there's 8 different ways to configure those 3 wires. And if you had 4 wires, there's 16. Now, are you guys seeing a pattern here? All right, always one left, what the place value of this one would be. So the place value of 1 bit is 1. Just go one more to the left, that's 2. That's how many ways you can configure that. Okay, here's our place values, 1 for this bit and 2 for this bit. Go one more to the left, and that's 4 different ways. Okay, for 3, go one more to the left, 8 ways. For 4, go one more to the left, 16. So if you had, right here, if you had 8 wires, and you want to know how many different ways you can configure it, just go one more to the left. 256 different ways. Now, it's very interesting. If you come back here to HR, if computer manufacturers, they want to sell computers that can deal with languages different than the English language, right? So what they did is they began to make jars 2 bytes big. And 16 wires basically can be configured 65,000 different ways. And that's enough to store every character of every alphabet known to mankind. So some computers will initiate a 2-byte character. But for right now in this class, char 1 byte is fine, and using the ASCII coding scheme is fine. Okay, so that's a little bit about variables. And it's a little bit about storage areas in RAM and how different storage areas, okay, of different data types can be created. And the important thing to remember here is that you have chars for a single character. That's what you need to know, and a byte for a whole number. And it 1 byte big, and it has a range, -128 to +127. Why? Because there's only 256 different ways to configure those 8 wires. And when you guys take other programming languages, you'll learn about a short and an int, and a float and a double.